A lot of me thought about telling you to turn to something other than the book of Nehemiah, see if I could throw you off. But Brother Graver, don't feel so bad. The road goes both ways. We could have came up a lot earlier, and we did too. The Graver family was always close, being that they came from the same church, and all the family was from our church, and so seeing them come visit was always special for us too. So we appreciated your hospitality, your hosting, your kindness, and your willingness to do that youth activity. It really is a blessing. It's just a blessing to be here and be with all of you, and we leave here with our hearts full and our cups running over. We're just truly blessed to be in the presence of the Lord with all of you. We started, I'll back step a little bit. We started talking in the book of Nehemiah. The title of the message was Get Home and Build Your Wall. And to put that in context as we go forward, we'll summarize just quickly and briefly what we went over on Friday night. But in context, we all need to think about the wall that we have at our home. Those four walls. Whether you're a child, parent, or you're the only one there, you need to think about those four walls. And I believe the Lord has given you those four walls as your hedge and your protection, your ability, so to speak, to keep things out. We're using Jerusalem in the book of Nehemiah to illustrate the walls and how the walls in Jerusalem were broken down. And one thing that's certainly always important to me is setting and understanding. I'm not a very intelligent person. I'm not going to claim to be. I probably could have done better in school, but I didn't, and that's no secret to many that know me. But I'm not very intelligent. But if I can understand where the books that I'm reading are talking about, when they're talking about, what time, in period that we're talking about, it helps me understand what's going on. Amen. And I think we all should strive to do that. I was talking to Brother Chris and I were talking late last night. We were just talking about setting and things like that, and I was talking about commentaries. Now, commentaries, we don't think, look, those are just for preachers. Those are just for pastors. Those are for any of us that want to study. Any of us that want to study the Lord and the books and want that background. I use my commentary to read first about a book, and then it makes I can make many things more applicable when I read the Bible. Go to Nehemiah chapter 2. The text for the original message was verses 17 through 20. We're going to read those really quick to set that up again. Verse 17 says, Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth in waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the good hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn, and despised us, and said, What is this thing that ye do? Will ye rebel against the king? Then answered I them, and said unto them, The God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, no memorial in Jerusalem. We must think about 4 literal walls. You can use this church. There's an exit right there. There's an exit right there. That's the first spot an enemy is going to come into. Your home has walls. It has exits. That's the first place an enemy is typically going to enter. Your home involves whoever is there. Your children, your wife, maybe it's your parents. We have to have a defense against the ones like are spoken in verse 18. So, Nehemiah. What's the significance of Nehemiah? Well, Nehemiah was part of the royal court. At the time, Nehemiah takes place about 444 BC to 430 BC, approximately 100 years after the Israelites were released from their 70-year captivity. Now, Persia at the time was the world superpower. Nehemiah was the cupbearer. He was given the job, the task to make sure that what was ever in the king's cup was not going to harm the king. He was an upright man. He was a Jew. He was one that stood at a high place before the king. But Nehemiah had a burden. He had a burden for the walls of Jerusalem. He had a burden for his people. Nehemiah, this book itself, is often referenced for church building projects, which you've said that you may be praying about. But I see this, I had this overwhelming burden about how Nehemiah speaks to me that I need to rebuild the walls that I've let break in my home and not worry about other people's walls. Because we find ourselves too often in each other's business. Now, I know you, but I don't know you. I don't know if you are in each other's business or not. But I'm going to tell you the most important thing you can do today is to make sure that your walls are strong. So, Nehemiah was a governor of Israel for about 12 years. He led the third return he was the governor of Jerusalem for about 12 years. He led the third return of Israelites into Jerusalem, the third and final. Without getting in too much, I want to get into 3 points. And we know it's always so hard to do a review when I've already preached part of it, and what do you say, you know? I want you to notice Nehemiah's leadership in building the wall. It's the kind of leadership that we need to take, no matter what the role in our household is, in building your wall. There's going to be times where the wall needs to be completely rebuilt. There's going to be times when the wall needs to be strengthened. And as we get to chapter 4 in Nehemiah, there's going to be times where the wall is going to need to be defended. And that's all of our responsibility. We see that, let's just read real quick. We can summarize the last part by reading verse 10 through 20 in chapter 2 of Nehemiah. Verse 10 says, "When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, they grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel." Before verse 10 is when Nehemiah is coming. He goes to the king and he says, I want to go to Israel. I want to rebuild Jerusalem. Verse 11, "So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days, and I arose in the night, and some few men with me. Neither told I any man what my God hath put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. And I went out by night, the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, into the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went to the gate of the fountain, into the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back, and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. And the rulers knew not whither I went, or what I did, neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. And let's just finish up in verse 17. It says, Then said I unto them, You see the distress that we are in. How Jerusalem lieth in waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. We see that, first I'll make a note. I made this note Friday night. Read chapter 3. We're not going to take the time to read chapter 3. Read chapter 3 and look at the significance of the gates. Look at how many gates there were. They had a purpose. But Nehemiah, he rises up in the night. And I believe what that tells us is that we have a responsibility to face whatever is before us instantly. Whatever that breakdown, whatever in our homes or in this literal, so to speak, wall, whatever the trouble that we have before us, it's better to not do what the Israelites did, not to do what the ones of Jerusalem did, and let the wall sit in ruin for nearly 100 years. Face it. Understand it. Examine it. I just wrote a couple notes, and sometimes these notes are for myself to just even understand the text. I wrote Nehemiah demonstrating wisdom and how we should demonstrate wisdom to examine what happened. Nehemiah was he was in the king's court. He was well fed, he was well cared for, he was well respected. He wasn't a person that had a lot of physical work to do, and yet we see him out here in the piles of rubble that have been impassable in spots. He's checking it out on his own. I used the analogy Friday night, and I said sometimes I'll have somebody that has a problem at work, and they'll bring it to me, and I can just say, okay, go do this, and let me know. And oftentimes it doesn't get fixed. Not to their fault, but they're not the one to fix it. I am. And how often can we delegate something that's going on to your spouse or somebody else, or just write it off? Much like the devotion in Sunday school this morning. Just writing things off and making light of our sins. Making light of the problems. Sometimes it's better to just do it yourself and ensure it gets done. Our first point for today would be we ought to examine the rubble and plan accordingly. I fear there's a lot of Christians today that are living like the ones in Jerusalem. Their walls are in rubble, the gates are burned, their homes are a wreck. They just come in to exist in church. They come in out of habit. They're just here. And that's it. That's the extent of it. There's no worship. There's no seeking the Lord. We ought to take a step back and examine the rubble. If that wall broke, if that wall right there broke, there's a reason it broke. There's a way it broke. You can't just put the broken pieces back and expect it to have strength. You have to rebuild. You have to re-strengthen. You may have to rise up early. You may have to work longer. You may have to work later. You're going to have to labor. Amen. Every single one of us, and I put a lot of this stuff to marriages. I just feel as though I have so many things to learn. Every single one of us that entered into a marriage, or any of you that want to enter into a marriage, you entered into a laborious covenant. There is a lot of labor. There is a lot of things that you have to do. When I look straight back and I see your church covenant, you have the same one that we have. You have the same thing on the wall. That covenant is all about striving for your labor. It's all about striving together in unity, in Christian love, striving to have family in secret devotion. It's labor. It's very laborious. There's many things that you will have to do that are going to be uncomfortable. That's where we see the significance of these ones in Jerusalem in the book of Nehemiah. Our second point found in verse 18, and probably the most important point. Then I told them of the hand of my God which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. If God isn't the strength of your wall won't withstand the storm. God needs to be your strength, which means after you examine the damage, the breakdown, or even if you haven't built a wall yet and you're building one, you have to understand where God fits in there. You have to seek Him. You have to seek wisdom in what to do next, how to build. I'm not going to read Nehemiah 2, verses 4 through 9, but I'll leave that for you to take notes. Some of you have already heard it. But in verses 4 through 9 in Nehemiah, it talks about the king's grace before Nehemiah. Now, I will back up and talk for just 1 second about what King Cyrus the Great of Persia believed, and that was Zoroastrianism, I believe is how Tyrianism. And it's the mixing of other religions and practice. They practiced some of what the Israelites practiced, and they practiced some of this one and some of that one. And he was this morally acceptable king, and he was good to Nehemiah. But you see that even before Nehemiah addressed the king in the verses between 4 and 9, that he goes to the Lord. He prays to the Lord. He asked the Lord to help him. He asked for wisdom. And I believe we see that as strength from Nehemiah. Verse 19 through 20. Nehemiah handles his enemy with strength from the Lord. Third point, and this is where we stopped. So we've made good time so far. Then he built it. Go to chapter 4 of Nehemiah. We're going to take the time to read the entire chapter. Chapter 4 of Nehemiah. But it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth, and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria, and said, What do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish which are burned? You see the sarcasm. We see the mocking. We see the picking. You're going to bring the stones up in a day? You're going to build the wall in a day? We're still going to attack you. How little of faith, and how you just see the amount of sin in the enemies of Israel. Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, Even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall break down their stone wall. That's a mocking. I stopped for a second, and I'm going to tell you, these are clearly outlined enemies. These are clearly outlined enemies of Israel. Your enemies may not be as clearly outlined. Right. There is mention time after time after time in the Bible of there is wolves in sheep's clothing. It's mentioned over and over and over again. Be careful who you let into your walls. Be careful who enters your house. Make sure your eyes don't leave that person. And hopefully by now you understand, I'm not just talking about the physical four walls that you live in. I'm talking about the four walls that you need to create around your family. Verse 4, Hear, O God, for we are despised, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity. And cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee, for they have provoked thee to an anger before the builders. So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah, and the Arabians, and the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up, and that the breaches began to stop, then they were very wroth, and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem, and to hinder it. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto God, and set a watch against them day and night because of them. And Judah said, The strength of the bearers and burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. And our adversaries said, They shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them, and slay them, and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dealt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, From all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. Therefore said I, in the lower places, behind the wall, and on the higher places, I even set the people after their families, with their swords, with their spears, and with their bows. And I looked, and I rose up, and said unto the nobles, and to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, Be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons, and your daughters, your wives, and your houses. And it came to pass, when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one unto his work. And it came to pass from that time forth that half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both spears, the shields, and the bows, and the habergeons. And the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. They which builded on the wall, and they that bare burdens, were those that laded every one with his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. For the builders, every one had a sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. In case you haven't figured out, the book of Nehemiah is in first person. That usage of me, it's one of the very few accounts that's first person. Verse 19, And I said unto the nobles, and to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, The work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from another. In what place therefore ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither. Unto us our God shall fight for us. So we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Likewise at the same time said I unto the people, Let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard to us, and labor on the day. So neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes, saving that every one put them off for washing. Then he built it, was our third point. Nehemiah followed through. He sought the Lord. He understood the damage. Then he built the wall. He led by example. He didn't delegate every task. He couldn't do every task, but he led by example. I think it's important. If you're a parent and you have children, I think it's important for them to have a task at home. It may be a meaningless and small task, but give them a task so that they can complete bigger tasks when the time comes. Whether it's taking out the trash or feeding the dogs or putting their shoes away. Give them something so that they can labor with you. Because one day they'll have to labor on their own. Your home comes under attack. Somebody gets inside your house. You're going to build. You're going to purge. You're going to do whatever you need to do. I'd like to start out with pointing you to the zeal that they had to build the wall. The zeal. We see early in chapter 4 that they're introduced to building the wall. They're introduced as making great stride. And they get about halfway and it stops. There's more oppression. They see these massive piles of rubble. And they start to realize there's a lot of work to be done yet. There's a lot we have to do. There's a lot of things that aren't finished yet. We see this trial. How the Ashdodites and the Ammonites and the Arabians start to come together. They're angry that this wall is going together. And we see them conspiring together to attack. And then we see that leadership in Nehemiah come back out again. And that's where we have to start in our household. Whether you're one person, you're a whole family. Men, if you are given the blessing of having a household, you have to lead it. You have to seek the Lord and lead it. And understand your role. We're all very zealous to start, right? I mean, you just think about when you were saved. Think about that first time that you may have fell out of, that you just weren't quite right, and the Lord brought you back and got you right, and you were back on fire. Or really, just think of any time that we go to a Bible conference and we get really excited about what we heard and we want to put that into practice. And then about 4 days after the Bible conference, we lose practice. That's where they were. This wall that lay in waste for 100 years got half built. A little oppression came. And they were tired. Oh, it's going to take so long to build this wall. It's going to take so much labor. The enemies are coming before us. What are we going to do? I guarantee you, if you never build a wall back up, you're defenseless. Verse 6, so we built the wall, and the wall was joined together unto half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. Even in that first half, before they got discouraged, the people had a mind to work. Your house, your physical family has to have the mind to work. We have the wonderful hymn, we'll work till Jesus comes. That is your church, that is you, that is your family. You have to work together. You have to understand the roles. For the people had a mind to work. Can you say that about your house today? Can you say that you have a mind to work? Do we have a mind to work for the Lord? We keep Him first. Verse 10 in chapter 4 says, and Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish that we are not able to build the wall. We had that mind to work, but now it's too much. Slow progress. Let me tell you, the devil knows when to attack. The devil will always know when to attack you. You may deal with things in your life that you didn't think you'd ever deal with. You may deal with things at church that you would think you'd never deal with your friends and your family. The devil is going to know when to attack you. He may come as a wolf in sheep's clothing. He may come from somebody in your church. He may come from somebody in your family. But if you're not ready to defend, if you haven't built that wall, you're putting your family at risk. They're weak, and that's just the illustration. This attack on them came as they were weak and as they were tired. They had that mind to work, and they labored, and they labored, and they labored until there was no laboring in them. Nehemiah commands them to pray. He commands them to remember God and fight for your families. If your family was threatened today, you're going to find some motivation. If our families get physically threatened by somebody, we find motivation. The problem is we may not often see that our families are threatened. It's easy to look at all of our children and say, well, we'll try to get them to understand and show them the gospel. But these young kids learn so much from just watching us. I was so wrong in understanding that and not realizing how intelligent these young children are. They're too intelligent. Mine pick up on things I don't want them to pick up on. Like, how did you see Dad do that? But we see that the Lord encourages faithfulness. In verse 16, and it came to pass from the time forth that half of my servants wrought in the work. The other half of them held both the spears, the shields, the bows, and the habergeons. We see great wisdom. Nehemiah understood the wall still needed to be built. He understood what needed to be done, and he understood that they weren't going to be able to do it without being threatened. There's plans for attack. He couldn't just continue to build the wall. They had to break up some of the duties. And that's where you see the real labor, when it talks about how they labored from sunrise to the stars were out. And they guarded that wall. And when I was trying to formulate this message, like I said, I had this first thought of the message come to me about building a wall from Brother Dan Gordon back in January. And I read through chapter 4, and it wasn't until I read verse 14 where it says, and I looked and rose up and said to the nobles and to the rulers and the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. That's where we're at today. See, that's why it has so much labor, or why it's so laborious. Because the Lord has blessed our families, because our families have expanded, it's too easy in this day and age to just do your own thing, to just do what you want to do. For me, just do what I want to do. Follow after the kids' activities, which I'm not saying is wrong. Don't run with that in any regard. But our modern families are so busy, and we're stuck in this me society that we forget what we are here for and what our responsibility with these children God has given us, and the wives and husbands that God has given us. And that's when it hit home to me that I was going to preach on Nehemiah chapter 4. Because I wasn't. I was preaching on the book of Habakkuk. And if that doesn't just make your throat burn a little bit, because you're realizing that you're fighting for what the Lord has given you, and it doesn't cause you to realize how poorly you've done it, then I don't know what will. But Nehemiah says, fight and build. Every person had a job. The builders had swords on them. While they're building, they kept their weapon on them. They had another half that was sitting over there watching, ready to attack. Nehemiah followed and had a trumpeter ready to sound the trumpet, to run in that direction and fight at any sound in sight of the enemy. You don't have a whole army. The Lord knows how many people He's given you. You know how many people the Lord has given you to protect your home and protect those walls. But you still have to do the job. I believe, men, we have to have a prayer life that leads our family, that is a lead by example sort of prayer life. Not one that you just, Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, thank you for this food, amen. That for a while earlier in the year I kept mixing up words and my kids thought was funny, but they remembered my prayer. I didn't mean to mix up words. I should go back. I was a complete accident. But that's my habitual prayer of talking too fast. My kids see that. We have to have prayer life. I wrote down, I didn't verify it, but I wanted to use it as a metaphor. Most walls in this time had a watchtower. They had some high point to see from. Who's the watchtower in the family looking out for danger? Who's watching on the wall looking out for danger? Your children must understand the importance of those four walls. We had all that rain and thunder and a storm roll through last night. Everybody would have slept a lot different if we didn't have four walls and a roof to cover us up. And it's the same analogy that we need to give the children, and why that's so important, and why this family that they've been blessed with is so important. I don't care if your children, like most from here today, that are a few years old, or if you're adult children that still live with your family. That wall that you've been given is important. Don't take it for granted. Verse 21 is a beautiful verse to me. So we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning to the stars appears. Likewise, at the same time said I unto the people, let everyone with a servant lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard to us, and labor in the day. They labored. They labored again. It's going to be a labor of love, so to speak. Protecting our household, leading our household, guiding our household, making the children understand what that house is for. If you're here and you haven't began to build your own household yet, I'll leave you with one thing to think about. Watch what your walls do now. Watch the walls around you and understand how important they're going to be to your life and the life that you intend to have. Because we're not just talking about the spiritual things. We're talking about those physical, those moral things. We're talking about all the types of attacking, I would say, that comes before a family unit, that comes before a house. Understanding what your parents have done for you and how they've loved you and how they provided for you is crucial for how you're going to teach and help your family. Go to chapter 6, verse 15 really quick. Before you go there, chapter 6 talks almost exclusively about the attacks that Nehemiah was under. As the leader of this project, the neighboring areas, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites, the Arabians, were angry. I believe they knew the power that Israel had when they sought their Lord. And they were angry, and they tried to lure him over and over and over again to leave Jerusalem, so that they knew that their strength in Jerusalem and how they could attack Jerusalem would not happen if Nehemiah was there. They tried to distract him from building the wall. They tried to draw him out. And that is another thing that I think we fail so miserably at today. We don't use enough wisdom to understand when somebody is trying to lure us and attack us. We see that Nehemiah didn't fail. He prayed to the Lord. He used the Lord's wisdom. Read chapter 6 as you have time. Understand the attacks that Nehemiah went through. Chapter 1 through chapter 8 is a really quick read in the book of Nehemiah. And there's a lot to be learned. It really gets into everything Nehemiah did, not just building the wall. But chapter 6, verse 15 says, "So the wall was finished in the 25th month, in the 25th day of the month, Elul, in 52 days." And I said this, and I closed with that Friday. But it's so important to realize that this wall, historically speaking, by all of my research and everything I could find, that wall at least laid in waste for 100 years. Really could have been more. The book of Habakkuk takes place somewhere around 1616 and up until 580 BC, and the attack on that attack on the Israelites, there was a 70-year period, and I'm not going to get into that, but I believe that it should have ended around 536 or so, 606, 596, somewhere in there is where my research pulls me that Jerusalem would have been attacked, and that King Nebuchadnezzar would have went in and knocked those walls down. So that leads at least 100 years that I can find that wall laid in rubble. And because the people had a mind to work, that wall was built in 52 days. That's half of our problem in today's day and age. We don't have the mind to work. And we don't get up and actually do it. We hear a message, we get convicted by a message, we see something, we get convicted by it, and then we go home and we forget about it. We are too responsible for each other and for what we have been given to not do anything with it. It has to require change. And I'm not saying that every one of you have it wrong. That's not at all what I'm saying. We have to be reminded about the importance of that wall. But 52 days it was built. 3 things I'm going to say in closing. These 3 things help us consistently maintain the hedge of protection that we need in our homes. If you're not centering, well, I would say these things these last 3 things, they can either protect you or hinder you from keeping your home. If you're not centering your family around prayer, scripture, and seeking the Lord's favor, you will open yourself up to the minefield this world has to offer. I stole that. That's not my quote. That's directly from Brother Graber's lessons on building families by the book. I loved how he said that. I love that illustration. And that's exactly what's going to happen. This, I believe you said it just like this, where this gives you the reference to make it through the minefield. And if our families aren't in it, I lump myself in that, we're going to step on some mines. And the problem with the mine is you never know what kind of damage it's going to do. Your focus is important. That doesn't just go for young families. That goes for everyone. Every single one of us have to be careful where we're stepping, what we're doing. Don't subject your family to the minefield. Go to Joshua chapter 7. I have never preached here before. Very few of you have heard me preach. I typically use a lot of scripture. I like to compare what I've learned in the past. I got a brand new Bible. This is the second time I've used it. Friday was the first. I used to have tabs, and I tell you, that'll make you cheat. I got to go back. There we go. Have tabs for that long, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're back in like your first Sunday school class where you're singing the books of the Bible to yourself to try to find out where you're going, so you don't have to go back and figure out what page number Joshua's on. But don't subject your family to that minefield. We see in Joshua 7, verse 19, it says, "And Joshua said unto Achan, My son, give, I pray thee, glory to the Lord of Israel, and make confession unto him, and tell me now what thou hast done. Hide it not from me." And Achan answered Joshua and said, Indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and thus have I done. When I saw among the spoils of goodly Babylonish garment and 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight, then I coveted them, and took them, and behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and silver under it. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran into the tent, and behold, it was hid in his tent, and the silver under it. And they took them out of the midst of the tent, and brought them unto Joshua, and unto the children of Israel, and laid them out before the Lord. Don't forget that part. Laid them out before the Lord. And Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan the son of Zerah, and the silver, and the garment, and the wedge of gold, and his sons, and his daughters, and his oxen, and his asses, and his sheep, and his tent, and all that he had, and they brought them to the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, Why hast thou troubled us? The Lord shall trouble thee this day. And all Israel stoned him with stones, and burnt them with fire, after they had stoned them with stones. Joshua was a young man. The reason I felt so burdened to make this message, go home and build your wall, is because it was a sequel to my message on Joshua, or on Achan in Joshua, and how Achan failed. Achan failed. He coveted this gold, he coveted this garment, and he took the accursed thing and he put it inside his walls. By history, in the Israelites' history, Achan was not an old man. They were still not to Canaan. It brought me to tears thinking about what my sin could have cost my children if I was Achan. There's many children before us today. There's been many of us have been children, and there's many probably desires to have children. Your sin can affect them. Yes. And if you don't be careful of the minefield, if you don't build the wall, if you don't get up, if you don't try, you're going to see that happen. You don't know what the extent of your sin will be on your children. You can sit there, and many of us like that heroic way of dying, like, oh, I'll go, or I'll do this. But the fact is, if it's your child and it's your fault, you have to live with it. That ought to break you. It ought to cause you to realize how important it is to build your wall and how to guard who comes in it. I am so thankful that the Lord has spared my family, because I have not always done as I should. I go back to my wife and I joke, and she's, don't beat yourself up. Don't do what I did. I beat myself up because the Lord has spared me time and time and time again. And I don't want anybody else to do it. The Bible gives us very vivid pictures of what happens to sin. And we see Achan probably didn't expect to go walking through and find the gold and the silver and the Babylonian garment. And his sin caused not only his family to be stoned and burned, but there were some other men, there were some other families that were affected by some men not coming home because of it. My grandpa used to say, sin will take you farther than you want to go, sin will cost you far more than you want to pay, and sin will keep you longer than you want to stay. You may set off down a road that you don't expect, and it may change your life. You may step on the wrong mine. You have to get in the book and be ready to build. Second to last point, to the leaders of your home. You can't lead your family if you're not willing to rise up and labor. Remember Nehemiah. He rose up in the night. He got himself out in the night. He went and examined the damage in the night. He realized it was that important to go. I believe there was a certain part of Nehemiah he didn't want a lot of people to know yet. That's why it states that. But the fact is, he went in the night. He went right away. He examined the plans. It's going to take self-denial. You may have to change the orientation of how your family functions today. You may find that there's some things that need to be changed. There's some things that are wrong. That for me, I was under the false understanding that I just needed to go to work and my wife would take care of a lot of the stuff, most all the stuff at home. And then I realized after 3 children and everything else that was there, that there is more at stake that I need to handle and I need to help and that I need to labor in to take some of the pressure off of her. So I say the orientation of your family may change. And it's better to get in the practice of leading your family now before you add to it. You can't lead yourself. If you can't lead yourself, you're going to have a lot harder time leading additions to your family. Take the time you have right now. Center your family around Christ. Seek Him in everything that you do. While you do that, build your wall. Have Him show you how to build your wall. The change of how much you labor, how much you lead, it'll be worth it. I guarantee you. The last thing I'm going to say in closing, you can't lead your family if you're not there. We find ourselves too often worried about what's going on everywhere else but home. Nehemiah couldn't have done what he did to rebuild the wall if he didn't go himself. Nehemiah had his brother, Hananiah, that was in Jerusalem at the time. He had resources to send messengers. I don't think the result would have been anything close to what it was. Nehemiah had to lead by example. Your home is your home because you're there to be an example. Don't meddle in the affairs of others. That's one of the biggest things that I see in our daily life that is wrong with our churches. I say that without apology. We meddle. We get involved in things we shouldn't get involved with. There's many good things about social media, but that's one of them that's bad. We can see when somebody's having a bad day, or when that family seems to be having a hard time, or whether it's in a church or it's a friend or it's whatever. And we often don't sit back and pray for that person or that family or the ones that are affected. We watch the demise of them. You've got to get home. You've got to get focused on home. You've got to be on watch. You got a wall built. You got gates built. You got everything there. Maintain it. Watch for the cracks in the wall. You need protection. God commands us to labor. We can't worry about what's going on next door. Our labor is going to be the result. I often tell my guys at work, we're in sales, and many people in the car business will just sit, and there's not much labor there. And I often tell our guys, activity breeds activity. That when we need activity, when things slow down a little bit, I only tell them off of my experience. If I didn't have anything going on, I'd get on the phone and start calling some of my previous customers and email and text and make the appropriate phone calls. I'd do whatever I needed to do. And the activity would normally breed activity. It would breed sales. So I tell my guys, hey, listen, activity breeds activity. 30, 30, and 30. That's what we need to do. 30 calls, 30 emails, 30 texts. That's what we got to strive for today. It's not fun. But your activity will breed good activity in your home. Bad activity outside of your home will breed bad activity inside your home. It's all about your labors. In closing, get home. Get home. Build the wall and stay out of everybody else's wall. And let the Lord lead you the rest of the way.